Paul and Kay, thank you for being here today. You know, Bob and Kay, I met them back in, I think, 2009. Bob and Kay were founders of the Canton Tea Party. Bob and Kay have done the hard work. They've put in a lot of personal sacrifice. And I can tell you right now that Bob Hall has been the subject of conservatives who decide if you don't look just right today, and you don't comb your hair just right, and you don't say something just right like I like it, and if you don't say exactly what I want you to say when I want you to say it, you know what? You've gone to the dark side. People, we are better than that. And I'm going to tell you, as a recovering elected official, and people ask me all the time, why don't you run for this or that or this or that and other? And they ask Sharon that all the time. And people ask me that about Sharon all the time. And they ask me that about Becky Dempsey all the time. And you talk about three tough women who had the daylights beaten out of them as elected officials. Who wants to go back and get some more of that? Because, see, I can do it for free. It doesn't cost you a thing. You don't have to pay me to get beat up. I just do it for free. And you know what? I'm not whining today, and I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me. I do it because I believe in the cause. So on its worst day, the path to liberty is an important one, and it's an important cause to fight for. And I will do it, I will try to do it with good humor, as Bob tries to do it with good humor. But I'm going to tell you something. Bob Hall is a very principled man, and as I was thinking about Bob this morning, I thought about when we were putting his campaign together, and something that he sent me to look at and to edit, and I'm going to read just parts of it to introduce him. Bob Hall is a graduate of the Citadel. And you know, there's something, yes, please clap for that. Not everybody gets to say that. And Bob Hall still lives that code of honor. The honor code of the Citadel is simple and it's straightforward. There are only 4 rules embodied in this one sentence. A cadet does not lie, does not cheat, steal, nor tolerate those who do. The first 3 rules against lying, cheating, or stealing are perhaps the easiest. The 4th rule, nor tolerate those who do, was and is the most difficult. This rule meant that anyone who suspected another cadet of lying, cheating, or stealing, but did not report it to the Cadet Honor Committee, was just as guilty of an honor violation as was the cadet who committed the offense. This is exactly how our incumbent elected officials have failed the American people. While it is possible that not everyone in the Texas legislature has lied, cheated, or stolen, many certainly have tolerated those who do. And to quote another great Texan, Scott Turner, what you tolerate, you just get more of. Our incumbent elected officials have consistently looked the other way, while their fellow legislators have committed egregious acts that should have resulted in the offending representative or senator being dismissed and or sent to jail. It is shameful that our elected officials do not have the courage nor the character to identify and publicly denounce the shameful, the illegal, the unethical, and the immoral acts their fellow officials commit. Citizens deserve better representation. Every elected official has a moral and fiduciary responsibility to not lie, not cheat, not steal, nor tolerate those who do. And it is time to bring a real sense of public responsibility to our Texas legislature. That, my friends, is one of many reasons that I and this organization strongly endorsed Senator Bob Hall. I am proud to call him my friend. He is a man that I assure you has gone to Austin to change Austin. But I assure you, Austin will not change Bob Hall. Please help me welcome my good friend, Bob.
Thank you, Joanne, for that. And I continue to be humbled and blessed to have this honor to be able to serve the people of Texas. Because I got to tell you, excuse me, I've got a little sinus here that keeps dripping on me, so I will try to overcome this, but bear with me if I get a little stuck on it here. But before I start, in the Senate, we'd say this is a moment of personal authority, just to speak on a couple of things that I would like to tell you about. Because as much as my staff and my wife and others keep trying to remind me I'm now a legislator, I'm no longer a Tea Party person, it's hard to get the activists out of me. So you're going to get a little bit of the activist part of what I want to say. And that is to speak just very quickly on what happened at the convention and what we have in a platform that came out of it. It is nothing like what the establishment wanted it to be when they went into it. They intended to water down, reduce our platform to a 1 or 2 page document that when you got through reading it, you really couldn't tell the difference between a Republican and a Democrat. And thank goodness, we had some folks on that platform committee like Pastor Stephen Broden and Ray Myers and some others who would not let that happen. Now, is the platform perfect? Far from it. Does it have too much in it? Probably so. Are some things that should have been in there that aren't? Yeah. But we do have some good things it did. Just let me tell you about a couple of them. One of them is Texas now makes it loud and clear that the people of Texas, and these all passed, were individually voted on by all the members that were there. Roughly a little over 8,000 were there at the time of voting, if you go back and look at it. In excess of 90% of the vote on each one of them. This was not done as a whole unit. Texas is now demanding that abortion be abolished, not cut back. No real fight occurred on strong language to secure our border. We got a very strong plank in there, including a plank for the Interstate Compact for border security as part of it, brand new. We addressed the issue of voter fraud. For those of you who haven't been paying attention to it, we have a serious voter integrity situation in Texas that's not just about fraud, but by a situation that has been set up by a morphing away from the rules and regulations and laws by our Secretary of State's office that today you cannot validate any election that uses electronic voting in any part of the process. You cannot validate that election and you cannot have a meaningful recount. And we called in there for that to be fixed. We got one part of our insurance business that remains under regulation that sets their fees. It's the title insurance. People buying and selling homes in Texas are paying way more than anybody else in the rest of the country for title insurance. Quick numbers are, most insurance agencies pay out in excess of 90% of what they collect. Title insurance pays out about 3%. So we're talking about it's time for it to move into the free market and let the market decide. That's going to save Texans millions of dollars. We got the plank to secure our grid, which is what this is all about. We'll be talking about is in there. And we got a tool. We got a tool that people have talked about, and there was a lot of pushback on doing it. But we've got the tool in there now that a legislator that talks one talk when he's campaigning and goes to Austin and does not follow the Republican platform can now be censured by the party. And that is a huge deal. My personal feeling, it's not so big in the fact that we can censure them and call them out. It's that we're going to have those that will run in fear of that and probably won't vote nearly as liberal as what they would have if they didn't have that looming over them. The other thing that I want to speak on to say is the upcoming election. There was nobody that really was more dedicated, I'd say, and Kay and I were as dedicated to Ted Cruz from the day that certainly after he started running for state senate at 1% in supporting him. Kay went to Iowa when I had to go to Austin, walked in 0-degree weather campaigning for him. We'd been campaigning where I know how hard Joanne worked. And we were as devastated as anybody when it came to an end. For now. It's not an end, it's for now, as Joanne said. And we sulked and moped about it and went through the phase, well, I'm out of this, I'm going to stay home. And then we slowly started pulling ourselves back up and really realizing that, as a good friend of mine that put out an email recently said, if we do that, we are abdicating our Christian responsibilities of what we're told to do. Our faith cannot be in any one man to lead us. Our job is to make ready the horse for the battle. The outcome is the Lord's. Duties is ours. Outcome is His. Ours is to work hard to do the job for Him. Put our faith in God that He will pick the people that are needed. And until it comes to the time that we come to our knees, not as a nation, but as individuals that make up the nation, there's a difference. We are not going to see this country turned around until we have, as our point of faith, check with Nehemiah, or back when they wanted the kings. We don't need a king. We need God. We just need leaders to manage God's word for us. So with that being said, as tough as it would be, Romney 4 years ago wasn't even on our list. But Kay and I packed up and went to Virginia and knocked on doors for him. We went to Ohio and knocked on doors because the alternative was unthinkable. The alternative is unthinkable here. So, well, we don't know what Trump will do. You're right, we don't. But what we do know is exactly what Hillary will do. And that's exactly what we don't want. So let's get over it, recognize what the race is, because we don't want the alternative. And in 4 years, we will be back on the Cruz crew to get things turned back around and clean up the new mess, but maybe a different mess. Okay, that's my soapbox from the Tea Party. Now, let me talk about the grid. We'll turn around for a second. There's a title. It didn't come out up here. But what I'm going to do today, I am not up here to entertain you today. I am up here to hopefully inspire you to get involved and help make a change in this area direction we're going in. Because till the grassroots get involved, we are not going to see any significant change. But what I want to talk about is our power grid. Many of you read about it. You've seen some of the things I've written. I imagine good many of you may get our Capitol Hall reports. I've written 4. We got another 3 that we're working on to come out to describe it. But in today's world, our geopolitical environment is not what any of us grew up in. If you notice, this is no longer the Leave It to Beaver world that we once knew. Well, we have that geopolitical change that is converging with a technology advancement that none of us could have ever imagined. A technology advancement that has brought us to the point that the threats to the country are much easier to accomplish really bad things because of our dependence on technology. When most of us were growing up, electricity was a luxury item. It was something that was nice to have. The power went out for a while, it was really no big deal. Having grown up in Florida where we had lots of storms, I can tell you there were days we'd go without power and it was really no big deal. It meant some cold baths is what it meant, but other than that. But today is entirely different. Electricity is the third most important thing to sustaining life. First is air. We will die in a few seconds without air. Water, a few days without water. But there are many, many people who will live longer without food than they will without electricity. In fact, the government study says that we don't have electricity for 11 months. We will lose 90% of the population. That's 300 million people. So this is very serious. And just a little bit of background so that for those that understand that this is not something new to me. This is something I've been involved in from a very detailed technical aspect for quite a while. And it's also to help for those that don't quite understand that nothing ever happens by accident. It's not an accident that you're here today. It's not an accident whatever other appointment may have taken you someplace else either got canceled or didn't occur that you ended up coming here today. Events in your life that have taken place before happened because God put them there. And sometimes we don't really see what those are or recognize them. This is a major one. As Joanne mentioned, when I graduated from the Citadel, I graduated with a degree in electrical engineering, worked real hard so that I could be at the top of my class, both militarily, in the Corps, because I wanted to be a fighter pilot. That's all I dreamed about, was going off to be a fighter pilot. The F-4 was a new aircraft coming online, and my class was going to be one of the first to go into it. But come graduation time, I didn't have a medical. I had failed the medical because I had 20/25 vision. You know how close that is? 20/25? But they said, nope, no flight school for you. But we'll let you go wherever you want to because you're at the top of your class. You're 20-something years old. I know where. That's all I want to go to California. How's that? I've never been there, so I like to go to California. So I got an assignment at Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California, on the Minuteman Missile Program in the R&D. That's the design and development part, not in the silos and not out in the field, but actually in the design work. It was interesting because when I showed up there, I was the very first second lieutenant to be assigned to the program. They'd only been taking senior captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels and on up because they understood how really worthless a second lieutenant is. They are, I got to tell you. And so, but I was there. I said, I got my orders. I don't know where else I can go. And so they found a job for me. Well, after about 3.5 years, I had just made captain. So I was a junior captain. And just to understand that the development of Minuteman was kind of divided into two parts. There was the missile itself that was in one office. And then all the silo work and the capsules and the command and control and things like that was in another office. Well, I was in the office that didn't have the missile, in systems integration. So another step, I should have never had a thing to do with the missile. But the DOD came out to the program office and said, we have a serious problem with the vulnerability of our missile system to a new threat, and we've got to come up with a fix to harden it. Now, that's the term that's used to protect something against an EMP. That's electromagnetic pulse. And incidentally, when I first started this down last year in Austin, there was nobody down there that could spell EMP. But now they can. And so we have a serious threat, and what they were talking about was out of the tests that were conducted in 1962 when we started doing high-altitude nuclear testing. We had to go do someplace other than the desert out there in Nevada because the people in Las Vegas and all the gambling casinos were really getting mad every time they set one off and they blew their windows out. So they said, maybe we got to go somewhere else. So we started testing in above the atmosphere. Problem was, every time we set one off, we knocked out the power grid in the islands. Well, at the same time, the Russians were doing the same thing, but their tests were over mainland Russia, Kazakhstan, and they were knocking out the power systems that they had there. Well, we knew we couldn't keep doing this. They knew they couldn't keep doing it, but we didn't know what each other knew, but we didn't want each other doing it, so we entered into a high-altitude nuclear test ban treaty real quickly. Well, our war gamers came up with this idea that this would be a great weapon, but it was one that the Russians could use against us by detonating a nuclear weapon a couple hundred nautical miles above southern Canada, and any of our missiles that were in flight would have had their computers fried. And this is a particularly serious problem because you remember at that time it was MAD, mutually assured destruction. Both Russia and the United States had massive numbers of nuclear weapons, and so it didn't matter who started the war, everybody was going to lose. So nobody wanted to start it. It worked. It really worked. We spent a lot of money, but it worked. Well, this unbalanced that completely, gave the Russians a huge advantage over us. And when they asked the question, well, why don't we just have the same threat with them? They said, that's because we're so much smarter than the Russians. We designed our missiles with the computers with integrated circuits that are susceptible to the EMP. The Russians are still using vacuum tubes in their computer systems, and they're not vulnerable. So our technology had gotten us even back then. Well, after about 6 months, the program was not getting anywhere. It was not producing any results of progress of coming up with a solution to fix the missile. The general in charge at the time was Ken Schultz, and he said, we got to reorganize. And in that reorganization, I got picked out of the ground system to move over to the missile side and be the project manager for hardening the missile and whatever else needed to be done. And recall, this was a highly classified program because to know that our missile system was this vulnerable would have been devastating to any war plans. But to pick a junior captain out of the ground system, put it in the airborne side for this project, but it gets even worse because the entire team, 9 other people that had parts of the missile that were going to be part of that team, were all lieutenant colonels or colonels. And I was a junior captain. Anybody here been in the military? Well, you know how colonels just love to take orders from junior captains. Well, you know, God helped me through that. Believe me, it was a challenge because what I found was every one of those colonels, the reason it wasn't going anywhere because they spent more time trying to come up with excuses to show why they shouldn't be blamed if it didn't work. And I didn't let that happen. What Joanne talked about, you don't tolerate people who are misrepresenting the truth, and I wouldn't do it. And we got through it. But anyway, the point was, I should have never been involved. I should have never been on the missile system. I never should have been there. I never should have been involved in it, but I was. I left the Air Force. I never told anybody what I had done because it was so highly classified. I had no idea even when it became declassified, so I never spoke about it. And then just about 6 years ago, I picked up the magazine. I read an article about our grid being vulnerable. And it's kind of like, what? We never thought of that. You know, back in those days, we're going to have a nuclear war. That was the least of our concerns. But it referenced a commission, a White House commission called the EMP Commission that had put out a report. I said, that's interesting. So I sat and got a copy of it. And I remember it arrived on a Friday, and I started reading. Well, I spent the weekend on that. I was so mesmerized by what it had to say. And I kept reading and said, wow, this is right. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, this is right. Because, see, what I had done, not only was the project manager for coming up with the fix on the missile, but then I had moved over and actually designed 2 pieces of equipment, one for the ground and one for airborne, that would detect an EMP event. We put it by the launch control facility and in the airborne launch control aircraft. And so I was intimately familiar with the whole, what it took and understanding it and so on. Well, I got through reading this and I said, well, this is pretty good. I wonder who wrote this. And I went and looked at the author list. And there were some of the same people that I had worked with in the Air Force that had now are part of the EMP Commission that had written this report. Well, then follow that up with a meeting that I was attended on something that had nothing to do, it was on education, and I ran into a man by the name of Frank Gaffney. Most of you probably know Frank Gaffney, and it was on education. And then we got to talking a little bit, and the conversation got around, and he mentioned something about the grid, and I said, well, what are you talking about? Anyway, learned out how involved he was at the national level on this, and he pointed out that Texas, ought to be doing something. And I said, I have no idea. This was just before I decided to run for office. And he says, well, Texas has its own grid. It could do something to protect itself. And I said, that's nice. I hope somebody does. The next thing I know, I run for office. I have an encounter with Frank again on something else, and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, interesting you'd ask, because I was getting ready to call you to talk to you about some criteria to put in a bill so that we could just start the process. And so we did. And so that's kind of my background. So people tell you that this is an idea I got after I read a Newt Gingrich book. I tell you, I was working on this before Newt Gingrich could write a book. Anyway, what's so significant about our electrical grid is that in the 16 items that's called our critical infrastructure, we can lose any one of those, and it's an inconvenience, but it's not devastating. Something with our transportation system could go down, our dams could break here and there, have financial problems. But losing our electrical grid is the one item that wipes out all the other 15. Now, just so you'll understand how our system is set up in the United States, and this is kind of part of the good news, there are 3 sectors. There's Eastern, Western, and then there's Texas, just like everything else. Most of Texas electrical grid system is in ERCOT. That's our version of NERC and FERC, which are the federal levels. The really good news is we aren't part of the national system. There is no national oversight of ERCOT. We do that. That is a Texas responsibility. So we have all the authority that we need right here to do what needs to be done. Now, just a quick explanation, because there's a different fixes that are needed, and I'll talk about some of these a little bit later. As you look at what is our electrical grid, to really answer that question. It starts off, we have a number of generation stations. They're coal, they're gas, and they're nuclear. We don't have much in the way of hydro, but in many places they do. And then we have the transmission over long distances from the power plants out to the substations, in which it's much more economical to raise the voltage very high, transmit the electricity, and then step it back down to get into the household. And those are huge transformers. We don't even make them here in the United States anymore. They weigh several thousand tons. Some are made in Indonesia, some in South America, and take about 24 to 36 months to get them. And so losing the high voltage transformers is a significant loss to us. And then we have the transmission, and you see the lines out there, the big towers that carry it from to the substations. And then we have the step-down transformers that bring it down to the voltage that you use in the house, with the power lines that carry it from the transformers on into the house, and then finally the residential, the commercial side. All of these have their vulnerability. They're different. There will be different fixes, different types of protection that will be needed and used, including the user, the commercial side, and the residential. And one of the points that the power companies make is, well, if you don't protect the houses, and you don't protect industry, why should we do anything? Well, it's just kind of like if somebody's in an automobile wreck and they end up with a broken leg and a bleeding spleen and liver, or liver, they go in and fix the liver first. And if that fixes, then the person's going to live. They can fix their leg. They can live with a broken leg, but you're not going to live with a bleeding liver. And that's what we have here, our heart. The electric power is the heart, and we have to fix that and know that's fixed, because it doesn't make any sense to fix anything else without it. It's kind of like border security or the issue with immigration. You don't worry about reforming immigration processes until you have a secure border, because it doesn't make any sense to do otherwise. Okay, the threats. Let me talk about electromagnetic pulse. There are 3 types. There's nuclear, there's natural, and then there is a non-nuclear EMP. The nuclear, which takes place, it occurs when a nuclear weapon, and it doesn't have to be a big one. Any of them will do. Now, there are enhancements that can be made so that it's more effective, but any nuclear weapon set off above our atmosphere, and that's important. You still get an EMP effect within the atmosphere, but it's greatly degraded. But when it goes above the atmosphere, there are no kinetics. That is, there is no blast from it. There's nothing to be felt physically. It just goes off, and in milliseconds, as a flash of light is all it amounts to. You would see from Earth. You wouldn't feel a thing. And incidentally, an EMP does not affect humans, animals, plants, or anything like that. But what happens when the nuclear weapon is detonated, the gamma rays, when they impinge on the particles in the atmosphere, they knock the electrons off the particles. And those flying electrons interact with the Earth's magnetic field to induce current into things that are electrical. And primarily it's a DC current, which is not what our power system is designed to carry, and that's the big problem. But it will introduce that current into anything electrical. Now you try to think of something that you have that doesn't have something electrical in it. There isn't much. Or that you don't, that electricity is used to get it to you. Without electricity, we have almost nothing. We have no water, we have no fuel, we have no sewer, we have no vehicles that run. You don't have a watch that works, you don't have a telephone that works, you don't have television, you don't have communications. Anything that becomes affected by it is lost. But that's occurred because of the gamma rays knocking the electrons off, interacting with the magnetic field of the Earth, and inducing currents. And then there's the natural. Natural is what happens in nature that we have absolutely no control over. Texas Tribune used this to kind of ridicule our summit last week. I think their title on their article was "Senator Warns of Death Rays from Outer Space," something like that. Well, let me tell you that there are also people that think that we have control over nature. They're called global. There used to be global warming, global freezing, global warming. Now it's just global change, that we're going to be able to change nature. Well, let me tell you, I don't buy into that at all. What the natural is, you know it as sunspots. It's more technically called a coronal mass ejection. And they occur all the time off of the sun. And they go off in all different directions. They only affect us when they come off of the sun on a trajectory that will intercept our orbit around the Earth. And the first known one that we have recorded occurred in 1859. That's right, 1859. It's called the Carrington event, by the scientists that figured it out. And we know about it because it fried the telegraph systems in the United States and in Europe. Matter of fact, it was so severe it lasted for 12 days. And not only did it fry the telegraph systems, but they found rail track that had been warped by the high currents going through them and heating them up. Now, the power companies will tell you, oh, we know about the solar activity, and we work with NOAA, and they let us know when it's coming, and we can shut down operations and get through it. That's got one of those things that has a little bit of truth to it, but in reality, it is a poor solution, because if they did what they're talking about, they would have to shut down if we had another Carrington event for over 12 days. Government study that was presented at our summit last week says that we have historical data that shows that any business that is closed for 10 days, it has a 93% chance of not reopening. 93%. So that doesn't really work. And they do occur. And they have occurred in modern times. In 1989, we had the event up in Quebec, Canada, and the northeastern part of the United States. Their power was knocked out for several days, several million people without power because of a solar event. And 2 years ago, we were within 2 weeks of being in the right spot in our orbit to encounter a coronal mass ejection that was 10 times greater than the Carrington event. And that would have been as severe or more severe than any nuclear detonation. And the third is a non-nuclear. You can actually go down to an electronics store like a Radio Shack and buy some very simple parts and put together an EMP device that will generate a very strong EMP, very localized, but it's real. I mean, it can be done. It is not devastating as everywhere, but several of them around the country would be very effective. I think the test that this came from, you can look Google this, was called Starfish Prime, and these were the name of the nuclear testing in '62. Now we know we've got documents from the Russians. We've had conversations with them. They've had it in their war plans for a long time. We know the Russians have it because they've hardened their electrical grid on the mainland all around near Taiwan. But you can't guess why they might do that. But we've known about that. But we also know from having captured Iranian war plans that they had very recently, in which they addressed using the EMP against the United States, 22 different scenarios that they laid out for attacks, 22 from Iran. We've had more than that in threats from North Korea. That's in their plans. And think about this. It used to be, when we thought about the United States being taken down, and this is one of the things that's really hard for people to comprehend because this is so devastating if it were to happen, but we are oblivious to what could happen to us because nothing ever has. We've never had an invading army. We have never had anyone come and take over America. And we've always thought it'd be something like a million men from Russia or China. It would take to do with lots of tanks and ships and aircraft and bombs and a big, big fight. But folks, our world has changed. That's because we've always thought about fighting on the ground with soldiers in war-type environment. Our environment is so fragile with our grid system, and the means by which it can be taken down is so easy. It makes us extremely vulnerable to an ISIS attack, a small group of people. In fact, I don't want to get this was good. This is these are the rational heads that are leading these countries that we have to deal with. Congress has worked tried to, for several years, get a bill passed. I've now met with Congressman Trent Franks. Matter of fact, I had a meeting just 2 weeks ago with he and Louis Gomer talking about this very issue. Trent has led the effort, had good support from Louis in it, in getting bills passed. We've gotten several out of the House. They die in the Senate. Recently got a good one passed. It's over there now. Hopefully, we will get this bill through the Senate to begin the process at the national level. But the power companies are a powerful lobby. And it's not a difficult thing to do. We'll talk about that just a bit. One of the most common possibilities is simply one small nuclear weapon with one medium-range SA-2 Scud missile and an old cargo ship. About 6 people. It was all it would take. Launch it off the coast of Galveston, or off the coast of Charleston on the East Coast, or Los Angeles on the West Coast. One. And it could take out 95% of the United States power. It doesn't have to be accurate. Just get it up in the air roughly 250 miles over the central part of the United States. I'm talking about Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, something like that, and set it off. That's it, just the one. We have had the other means of delivery. Matter of fact, this is really particularly concerned because in 2013, we intercepted a North Korean vessel hauling sugar in the Panama Canal that had 2 full-up SA-2 missiles with their launch gear on board. No nuclear weapon, but the 2 missiles were there. In 2013, April of 2013, and I believe the date was the 16th of April, there was a massive ground attack on a substation in Palo Alto, that's in the Bay Area in California, that almost took out about 1/5 of the electrical power in California for a very, very long time. It missed it by one circuit. One circuit. On that same day, the North Koreans put into orbit a weapons-grade satellite on a southern polar route. That is, it comes around the Earth from the South Pole over the United States. And all of our missile defenses, all of our defenses are on the north side. In January 15th of this year, they put up their second one. We now have 2 North Korean weapons-grade satellites in orbit. They cross the United States twice a day. And the really interesting thing that was pointed out at our summit that they've now somehow has leaked out, neither one of those 2 satellites has ever sent back any data. Most satellites are put up there to gather information and send back data. Neither one of those have ever sent back any data. Another method that could simply be used as a weather balloon. It could be done with a weather balloon. Cheap. Now, it won't get quite as high as what we could do with a missile, but believe me, it would do just about as much damage. The military is aware, has had this as a part of their doctrine since the 70s. The equipment, what we ended up doing on the Minuteman program, some of that stuff rolled over into developing the criteria for communications gear and anything electronic that DOD did, all had to be what they called nuclear hardened against radiation, EMP, all the nuclear effects, and many equipments had to be blast protected. This is one that re-emphasizes it. Last year, military decided to reopen Cheyenne Mountain. Cheyenne Mountain was where we had NORAD during the Cold War. It's where we had the military command that we thought was in a place where we would survive a nuclear war, but when the missiles got big enough and accurate enough, decided that they would not survive a direct hit, so they finally moved out of Cheyenne about 20 years ago, shut it down. Well, now they're going to spend almost $1 billion, $700 million, to refurbish it, reopen it, and put the command structure back in there specifically because of the EMP threat. We have, I'll go back to that. We also have seen that the DoD recently released a request for proposal for the development of microgrids for military bases. Because currently most military bases rely on commercial power for their community. Now they're going to be looking at developing a microgrid that would be hardened for the military bases. I covered this with the Quebec storm. Now, one part of the good news is been out talking in spite of the power companies and getting people to understand what this is all about. We have brought on a number of allies that are working with us. Alan West, been working with him. He's going to be helping us put together some additional videos to get out on this issue. And the Blaze. And I'm going to show you a little short video that the Blaze put together just for us to be used to help explain this from one of their programs that you may have seen the whole thing.
An EMP is a massive electromagnetic pulse. It can be released from a nuclear device detonated at a high altitude, destroying electrical grids for hundreds of miles. The aftermath of such an attack could be devastating. Distribution of food and medicine would be nearly impossible. There would be a shortage of clean water, and first responders would be left with no means of communication. Now, this may sound like something out of an apocalyptic thriller, but this is not fiction. This is a critical national security issue that leaders from both parties take seriously, because they know that rogue nations and terrorist groups dream of a world without the United States.
After 9/11, Congress ordered a series of studies on weapons of mass destruction. In 2004, the EMP Commission delivered a report on the threat of an electromagnetic pulse attack on
This
the
is the
United
report
States.
I was referring
The
to.
EMP Commission published 5 reports, 3 were classified and 2 were unclassified. The 2 unclassified were in 2004 and 2008. They laid out a scenario where a very entry-level weapon in the 20 kiloton range was lobbed at not a very high altitude over Cincinnati, Ohio.
Michael Del Rosso is an engineer and Pentagon consultant. He has worked with the EMP Commission, and he has participated in confidential congressional briefings on nuclear threats to America.
And the reason they chose that target is because that weapon with the radius of line of sight at the altitude, which was a nominal altitude, would have covered 74.5% of all the electric generating capacity in the United States and 83% of the substations in the United States and the majority of the population.
Bill Graham, who was the chair, the one statement he made that I think needs to be remembered is EMP is one of a small number of effects that has existential consequences that could threaten the existence of the United States.
George Baker is Professor Emeritus of Applied Science at James Madison University. He sits on the Board of Advisors for the Congressional Task Force on National and Homeland Security.
The effects could be so widespread that, in effect, you'd have breakdown of governance. In Bill Graham's testimony, he thought that upwards of 50% of the population would die within the first year.
For the Record has learned that in 1995, a Russian think tank presented a report to the Russian army recommending the military align with rogue nations, sharing both weapons of mass destruction and missile technology.
There was testimony in 2004 by Soviet flag officers that they rather sheepishly said that technology for super EMP weapons had actually leaked out to North Korea and other rogue nations.
We think enough word of it is leaked out, and it's not a very technically complex idea, that it could well be the case that the North Koreans could pull off something like that.
There's no one that will deny with any credibility that the reason why North Korea and Iran are self-professed emerging nuclear threats to the United States of America is because Russia and China want them to be and have enabled them to be. This is not idle thought. This is what nation states like Iran and North Korea have spent billions of dollars developing this capability. They're doing it for a reason, and they say the reason is the fact that they see the United States as their primary adversary.
On July 9, 1962, the United States conducted a high-altitude nuclear test over the Pacific Ocean. It was called the Starfish Prime Test, and the electrical pulse from the blast was felt 900 miles away in the Hawaiian Islands. The data collected from that event showed the U.S. military the potential damage an EMP can cause, information they have had for more than 50 years.
After the Starfish Prime test, the U.S. government immediately took steps to protect military assets.
The Department of Defense, as they built out the Minuteman system, the ground system and the missiles, included EMP protection in the Minuteman system. It's been 50 years ago.
So we've hardened that capability tremendously, again, at the cost of hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. But our civilian grid, upon which 99% of the military's electricity in CONUS is dependent upon, is essentially unprotected.
I think that's largely right. I think the only civilian systems that were hardened were the president's airplane and maybe some of his command and control, assuming you want to consider that civilian. But no one was thinking of protecting the civilian infrastructure.
And that is the great conundrum here for me, is that one of two things is true. Either the military has this wrong, and this is no problem, and therefore we should stop spending all the money to harden against it. Or if it is a problem, then we should harden the grid upon which the military depends for 99% of its electricity needs in this continent.
Nobody's in charge of the electric grid. Do you think Department of Energy? No. Department of Energy basically works on nuclear waste and funds nuclear laboratories. There's a small office that deals with electric grids, but nobody that has any real power. This is something that is not being dealt with. It is improvements in it are fought by industry, and it's extremely frustrating because it's very dangerous to let this grid sit there the way it is while the Russians and Chinese have fully and completely protected theirs. Yes.
They're ready to go.
Yes.
Who was that today?
Well, it tells you that on this issue, the Russians and Chinese are more responsible than we are.
In 2004, the Congressional EMP Commission estimated that it would take a one-time investment of $2 billion to harden the entire U.S. electrical grid against an EMP. Today, that estimate has actually been reduced to $500 million. That's less than 1% of what the Government Accountability Office reported was wasted in 2012. And that's our show for this evening. Thank you for joining us on For the Record. We'll see you next time.
She obviously repeated a number of things that I had talked about there. How's this? It works better if I hold it up here, doesn't it? I'm a slow learner. All right. I think we've covered most of that. I mean, we're talking about without power, just a few days, we're going to have absolute chaos. I imagine if you were to think about it now, you probably would do an inventory of your cupboard and refrigerator, and probably maybe about 3 or 4 days worth of food that you have there. There's about that much for everybody in the grocery stores out there. So it would not take long to go into total chaos with all of the rest of our infrastructure being shut down. Remember, trucks aren't going to roll. If you happen to have a 1974 Chevrolet or earlier, you might have a car that will run, or maybe your old riding lawnmower, but you'll soon run out of gas on it. Maybe some of you have a bicycle that can still ride. But there'll be no transportation, but there'll be no pumps running for water or for fuel. There'll be no way to get things moved one place to the other. And primarily, and most important, there won't be a way to go out and repair things. Think about this. First couple of days, the workmen who have responsibility to repair might show up for work. But about the third day, with the babies crying and the wife crying, how many workers are going to continue, and riots starting in the street, are going to leave to go repair things? And we have the same situation. I've spoken with first responders. I've spoken to a number of groups of first responders and asked them about their plans, what they have. And they were talking about, oh yeah, we got a plan. I said, I bet you got a plan for hurricane. Yeah, we got one for hurricanes, tornadoes, fires. We got one for riots, for earthquakes, airplane crashes. And I said, what do you do? I said, oh, we start out with our call list. And I said, okay, what's your plan when you have no way to call anybody? And then get the crickets, like, oops. I said, that's a plan you need to have in place, is how do you react when you can't communicate? We've become so dependent on communication that everything begins with it. It's a real challenge for first responders. And the good thing is we are working with a number of groups that have recognized this now. InfoGuard, which is a big combination of business people and the FBI, working with some of the first responders. BENS, Business Executive Network, has a whole subcommittee on this issue. And I can say now that I do see some light at the end of the tunnel. I do see that we have made some progress. Most of those people you saw in that video, we had at our summit down in Austin last week. I'm working with them. Dr. Baker, James Woolsey, they are out there helping us right now. We are in communication with them and helping to put together the bill and keeping us up on what the latest arguments and discussions are with the power companies on why they aren't doing this. So let's talk about what we can do. As I said, I wasn't here to entertain you. I'm here to prep you for your actions here. This is the wording that's in the platform. And this is why I felt good about it. It's not long, but it's right to the point. It's what we need to have happen to protect our electrical grid system. There were a number of people who wanted to call out the PUC and the ERCOT and the governor and the lieutenant governor, and I said, no, we just need a statement of what needs to happen. Let us work through what path that would be, because there are multiple paths by which we can make this happen. We are looking into the PUC and ERCOT. It is currently my opinion, and that's all it is my opinion, that the authority exists today within the PUC and or ERCOT to start making this happen if they would just do it. But what we have is this unholy alliance. This is not a very politically correct chart, but it is the way it is. It is the power companies, ERCOT, and the PUC. It is a self-serving triad of folks that deal with the power companies. All of those, they rotate within there. They're there to look out for each other, and they have mutually hung together on this to not do anything and to pay it lip service. This is, I got ahead of myself. This is exactly what was in there, which is just a little bit longer version of what we said before, but it's specifically just go protect our grid, harden it without talking about how we're going to go about doing it. And here's the part now, the assignment. Because when you leave here today, every one of you is going to make a choice. And you have no choice in making that choice, because you will make it. You will either go home, and remember this, that was really interesting, gee, I wish somebody would do about it, and choose not to help solve this problem. But I want you to remember, the words are, we the people. Those aren't just cute words. That defines the government of our country. It is we the people. We all have a responsibility no matter where we are. I just happen to have this one of being an elected official right now. I will someday have a different role, but officials at different levels all have a responsibility. But in that, you have a responsibility. And I will say that one of the reasons we're in this mess we're in is because a big chunk of this, we the people, have been apathetic and willfully ignorant of what's going on and not doing anything about it. And the only way we're going to get out of this is to change that and become more active activists in taking a part. So your choice will be either go home and do absolutely nothing, or go home and choose to try to do your part in helping to make this happen. And what you could do is to make sure that your elected officials, your state representative, your state senators, our lieutenant governor, and the governor know that you are interested in this, that you are concerned about it, and that you want them to do something about it. Because one thing I've learned down there in Austin, the nature of some of these politicians down there is they are scared to death to go do something if they're going to get criticized by the majority of the people for doing it. They don't want to do that. They want the cover to know that what they're doing. I'll take an example. Governor Abbott, with his ad he ran for office on transportation, he felt really good about being able to run that because 99% of the people are really upset about what we're doing or not doing in transportation, so he knew he had a lot of cover for that. He doesn't know he has a lot of cover for this because we end up with articles like what was written by the Tribune, and a lot of people are afraid they're going to be made fun of, which is what we were made fun of last year, being just a little out there in the fringe, wondering where my tinfoil hat was. Well, that's going to happen, but we just have to set that aside and move on. So they need to hear from you. We've passed out sheets that give you the contact information for the PUC, for ERCOT, that's our Electric Reliability Company of Texas. They're the ones that basically manage all the power companies. And then you get your own power bill. So you know who your power company is. You have a phone number on there and an address. Write to them. Send them an email. Write them once a month. Don't just write one and say, I did that and got it over with. Write one once a month. Write it until it happens. Stay on them in there, because there is nothing like pressure from the outside to get people's attention. And it's working. I have Democrats down there stop me in the hall now and ask me how I'm coming with this bill because they got people at home that have been asking about it. That's what they tell me. I said, I don't know anything about this, but I got people calling me down there in Houston, or was where that primary was. How are you coming with it? And I said, well, if you'll help me, we can probably get it passed. And he said, you let me know. I got some people that are on the dark side of the fence in the House that have come to me about this issue. So I'm hopeful that we're making progress. We aren't there yet. We need your help with it. So with that, I can stand up here and talk to you all day.
We have more questions than I have had all year, Senator Hall. So we're going to get started. If you do not hear yours, I'm going to try and incorporate some. Can we disconnect the Texas grid from the rest of the USA? I think that goes for a lot of things, but...
We are, for the most part, not connected. If you go back and think about that map, there's up around in the northwestern part of the state, there's a little bit of connection on the northwest and the northeast part, and then we pump power into Mexico down in the south. But those are all severable connections. And what we do does not necessarily require they be disconnected. And the other side is that right now there is an evaluation going on about moving Lubbock and those areas into ERCOT to become part of us. But we are, that's not a problem.
That's a good question. Since all corporate expenses wind up being paid by consumers, why did the power companies lobby against hardening?
If I really knew that answer, I would have an argument because it's been so illogical with it. there's got to be an element in there that the power executives are more concerned about their paychecks and bonuses than they are about doing what is right to protect the people. But I also think there's a piece of it to give them, help maybe give them at least a sliver of an excuse, is that not enough people have known about known and accepted this as a threat. I mean, before you came here, let me ask you, how many a year ago, how many of you had heard about this EMP threat? More than a year ago. Okay. Well, that's more than
this is a special group.
Yeah, I know. I'm talking good. This is you guys are special over here. You pay attention.
I mean that sweetly.
And I do too. I mean, you guys are what we need more of.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people out there that are still, squint their nose. Huh? What's that? Spell out again for me. They don't know, and it may be that they are still smarting from getting beat up so badly over there, and rightfully so, with their smart meters, that they're reluctant to do something. One of the arguments they put out, and I consider it to be just a fallacious argument, is that I mentioned it earlier, they said, well, it's going to knock out industry and the residents. There's nobody to use the power, so with nobody there to use it, we aren't going to be able to turn back on, because in power distribution, it has to stay balanced. Most people understand that the power companies don't just generate a bunch of electricity and then you use whatever you want. They have to instantaneously be producing exactly what we are using. And so they're continuously changing generators, bringing them online, taking them offline to meet what the demand is. And they've got to have a demand out there to come online. Well, there are ways to work around that, but that's the argument that they use. The other one is that, oh, don't worry, something happens, we'll be able to repair it. It's not going to be a big deal. No, it's not going to be what you think it is. I've just never heard something that really makes sense, but I do think that if they are aware, that people are aware and want something done, that they're going to be, and I will say this, they have been starting to reach out to us in a different tone than what they did a year ago. There is a new head of the AEC, a lady that just took it over several months ago, and she has been very cooperative in trying to work with us, whereas the previous one was very hostile. A couple of the larger power companies have reached out. I've got invitations to go visit their facility, and they want to talk. I have met with PUC, I've met with ERCOT, and it's moving, but it's not going real fast.
All right. What is Europe and South America doing about the EMP problem, or Asia, Africa, Australia, etc., for that matter? So what are other countries doing that we're not?
The ones that we know about, China has already hardened a great deal of their grid near Taiwan. South Korea has been in the process for a while now in hardening their grid. The big one is Israel. They are hardening their grid. I've met with people from Israel that are involved in it, and I do know that last month when our lieutenant governor made his trip to Israel, he was given a briefing on the Israelis' efforts to harden their grid. We also understand that the Arab Emirates are hardening theirs, and there is belief that the Iranians are doing it by manufacturing their own items, own equipment.
For the essence of time, because we always try and respect your time, and we have a stack here, so I know Senator Hall will, even if he's hungry, will stay longer
Absolutely.
to answer questions. I'm going to answer a couple more and combine some, but I know that he will also be here to answer your questions. So, are there any preemptive measures being done to destroy suspicious North Korea satellites that may be EMP threats? Like, what do you see out there being done for this?
That's way above my level of, but I would say that if we were going to do it, we would have already done it. And we should have destroyed that first North Korean satellite the day it was put up.
Yeah. All right, this one, why are heavy step transformers not made in the USA and enormous timeline replacement?
No, I think you'll find if you go back and look at all of the regulations that were put on the manufacturing process that they would go through, that they were run out of the U.S. just like a lot of other businesses were.
Last one, because there are a lot of personal questions. We want to know, coming from the East Coast, we've been through snowstorms that we even had, days to prepare for 12 days. It's miserable. So when you talk about those first statistics that you did within months, a population wiped out, what personally can we do? I mean, you think about everything now that's been turned over to electricity, our banking, our prescriptions, whether they work together, everything is online. What do you suggest? We went through Y2K, we all survived it, so then we kind of put it on the back shelf that this couldn't happen to us. What personally can we do? Bring this down to a level we can get.
This is one I would suggest that if you haven't read the book 1 Second After by Forsyth, 1 Second After. It's a really well-written book that describes a community in North Carolina for the first 12 months after the lights went out. The other is, at the risk of using the words of what the preppers have done, pay attention to what preppers have done. It's what you would do to be able to take care of your family for 6 to 12 months in self-sustaining. I'll tell you, the folks that will do the best for a while are the Amish, because they don't use electricity, but they also don't have guns. So, as I say, they'll do okay for a while.
We may have them on that one.
Yeah, and the Mormons. Believe me, the Mormons are known for their facilities in being prepared for catastrophic events.
Thank you. Rick will close us out, but I just want to tell you, I know there's a lot. We've never had so many questions, so please take time with Senator Hall before he leaves, and we thank you. Rick will close us out.